Thank you for joining us for this vital conversation, BRICS at 20, on the cusp of strategic significance. The title really captures the central tension of the moment that we find ourselves in. In a world which is marked by geopolitical upheaval, a weaponized economic order, and weakened multilateralism, can BRICS move from dialogue to delivery? And can it serve as a platform for meaningful South-South cooperation, which shapes outcomes rather than simply articulating the aspirations of the global South? BRICS has evolved from the early 2000s into a political and economic coalition that reflects the profound shifts that are currently underway in the international system. What started with Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa truly signals the emergence of a multipolar economic as well as a multipolar geopolitical order. The numbers tell their story. In the last 20 years, BRICS' share of global GDP has nearly doubled and is at 45% today, while the share of population of BRICS countries is nearly 55%. Despite the naysayers, BRICS is an idea that has outlasted its staunchest critics. While its institutional footprint has seen some modest growth, there is definitely room for it to cater more to the needs of the global South on critical issues of connectivity, energy, technology, health, and supply chains. In this discussion, we will reflect on what BRICS has been and what it can become in the next decade. I'm going to start with Valerie. We are on the cusp of a new BRICS presidency with India taking over on January 1st. And it would be a good time to perhaps get into what has been a contentious topic, which is the expansion of BRICS. Should BRICS be expanded further in the next year? And that is also relevant because it was during Russia's presidency that it was decided to pause expanding the grouping further so that existing members can be better integrated. What are your thoughts? How can that happen?
It's a good question how to integrate new members of BRICS, but the problem is not these countries itself, but we can see on some challenges that BRICS faces today. For example, and first of all, is the lack of institutional foundations within forum. There is no clear criteria for the membership. But it's necessary for effective governance. And second, members are very diverse in political structure, which also makes it difficult to find consensus in decision-making and develop a unified policy of the BRICS in such organization like United Nations or World Trade Organization. So the problem here is how to create a flexible management mechanism that from one side takes into account unique features of the members and on the other hand helps to reach consensus on strategic issues. And one more problem is there are contradictions even between core members of BRICS. For example, China and India are strategic rivals, at least in the Indo-Pacific region. And many experts in India, for example, noted that China strives to partnership inside BRICS just to enhance its influence and to become a center of economic prosperity. And in this case, the BRICS can become an instrument of China's foreign policy. In turn, China emphasizes that its economic projects are mutually beneficial and never linked to some political conditions. So we need actually as members of BRICS to find some consensus on that issues. So problem is here in some challenges, and if we solve them, we will have no problem with newcomers in BRICS.
All right. Luke, I also realize actually that all our panelists are from the original BRICS countries, so we do not have new inductees in this discussion. I want to bring on the question of Africa and how it is the geography of the most consequence for BRICS countries. It really is the bridge between markets and global supply chains and critical minerals and resources, as well as new trading routes. How can African countries ensure that they shape and benefit from this cooperation?
Thank you, Sunaina, and thank you for having me here. I love the fact that you picked that I'm representing Africa, and I'll try and do justice.
You're representing South Africa as well as
as well. Hey, okay. So let me just begin with the reality that the future of BRICS will not be determined only in India, in China, Brazil, South Africa, but it will be determined with the need of Africa. Why am I emphasizing that Africa is a key player in this? If you look at the metrics of the countries that are within BRICS, when it was founded, you've got your Brazil, they are very good with the agriculture. You've got your Russia, this is where the energy is coming from. You've got your India, their manufacturing is watertight. You've got your South Africa, that's your minerals. But the question is, what is Africa bringing? Africa is bringing quite a lot. The first thing that I want to emphasize is the demography, which is what you pointed in your initial opening statements to say. The demography of the world seems to be skewed towards Africa. It's believed that by 2050, 1 in 4 people will be Africans. So it tells you that this is where the market is, and this is where the labor is. I know there are a lot of assumptions and a lot about limitations about the demography. It's not properly skilled. I think that's a challenge that can be remedied. Then the next thing that I want to put through is the minerals. I want to talk about manganese, cobalt, the vast of these, including the rare earth within Africa. So it puts Africa at a place where it's the tying end of all of these countries. So you cannot then want to say there will be a BRICS without Africa, and yet everyone else in the world is looking at Africa. So having said that, then it means that Africa has to come to the table not as a beggar. We need to find ourselves and not disintegrate the market that is already integrated. We need to come as a unit and not as individuals. Because the moment we come as units, it then disaggregates the market. We don't have a voice. I was actually thinking now to say, what stops from countries that are endowed in PGMs in Africa to have more like an opaque system where they have control of the market? What stops countries that are rich in cobalt in Africa, your Zambia, your DRC, to have a union that is an oversight on these raw materials? So I'm just trying to make you see how Africa is at the center of BRICS as a region, in as much as we've got South Africa, but I think we now need to move over to a situation where we speak as a region. Thank you, Sunaina.
So a very quick follow-up to that, the question that I had actually also posed to Valerie, should BRICS be expanding further? And you talked about integration of Africa. Does that mean bringing in more African countries?
Thank you. That's an interesting question, but I always want to put this in as pragmatic as possible. And unfortunately, the example that I'm going to use might not be familiar with those that don't use public transport. Have you ever noticed that when you get into a public transport system, you don't want it to stop for anyone? You only want to go alone. And I think this is what I'm trying to put through to say, I don't know why, if this is for the development of humanity, we should have restrictions on the membership. I know he raised issues and problems that are inherent with BRICS. And I like problems, such problems. Why do I like them? Because it shows that there is an interaction in the process of building something. It's not something that you're being handed over. It's something that you're participating to model. So in as much as there is a lot of noise, in that noise, we can find each other if you want. So in as much as the membership has been stopped, if I want to put it that way, I still believe that the African proverbs that says, if you want to go further, you go with everyone. But if you want to go faster, like the country that we all know, you go alone. So I would say, let the inclusion of members not be restricted, but let the process that mandates a member that is applied be followed religiously. Thank you, Snana.
Okay, Mariana, would you agree? Luke is an optimist, and he believes that the BRICS countries can work together through the problems. Brazil, through its recent G20 presidency, as well as the BRICS presidency, and through COP, has been a very vocal advocate for South-South cooperation. Do you think that BRICS can move beyond the sort of incremental progress that we have seen on South-South cooperation? Is that even possible given the divisions and fragmentations that actually exist within the member countries?
Thank you. So good morning, everyone. It is true that we live fragmentation, that we live competition, that we live so many different visions and interests among BRICS countries, but it's also true that this is the only viable way for us to do the necessary change that we want and we need to do. I don't see any other viable path that doesn't go through South-South cooperation. So this is the first thing for us. We are currently living in a polycrisis world with multiple crises. We live in an emergency, a climate emergency, with high inequalities, poverty, hunger, lots of conflicts, wars, that tell us that what we have in place, it's not working, and we need to change. And this change won't come from any other place than the Global South cooperation, the Global South countries. So that's what you were telling us. We got to come together. That's the only way for us to do the necessary change. So we also know with BRICS, looking to BRICS and BRICS expansion, it is true that we still don't know what it means, these new BRICS. I think we are, all of us, trying to figure out and understand in terms of impacts and results, but we do know that we are talking about a significant portion of the population, the global population. We are talking about a significant share of GDP. So we do know that this is powerful. This is something for us to have in mind. But we also know that the expansion won't drive us to the necessary change that we need and want. So the question is, what are we going to do with this? That's the question that we need to pose to ourselves. And to do something concrete, we need mechanisms and innovative solutions. So I wanted to raise, there are several paths that we need to explore when we look to South-South cooperation and among BRICS countries, but I wanted to explore three concrete ones. The first one is the new launch of the BRICS of Trade, Climate Change, and Sustainable Development Lab. It was just launched this year by the Brazilian presidency. This is quite unique and important because it first reinforces the commitment to multilateralism systems, looking to trade, to climate, and to sustainable development. But also, it's very unique because it brings a positive approach when we look to climate action and how it can provide Also economic and trade opportunities, and this is really important when we look to climate action. And also because it helps us to reinforce the three components of trade, climate, and sustainable development. So this is something, this lab, that I think we should look at next year, talking already with the Indian next presidency. The second one is about the NDB, the New Development Bank. We've been asking for the MDB's reforms that needs to happen. It's a must. But we do have a concrete opportunity to do things differently when we look to the NDBs, so to the New Development Bank. So we have little history when we look comparing to other MDB banks, which for good and for bad, I would say. And it helps us and allow us to do and to build a different story. So I think this is my second pillar here, path. We need to look to the NDB to foster what we already have, but also to expand for new areas in terms of investment. And I'm talking about just transition. We need to help the BRICS countries to overcome and to become green economies. The other thing, also to look to adaptation, to hunger and poverty. So these are some of the topics that are not still in the NDB agenda, and it has to be. We can look, for example, for other multilateral development banks, such as the Asia Infrastructure and Investment Bank, that they have as a priority at least 50% of the investment goes to climate projects. So we gotta be bold, we gotta be innovative within the New Development Bank. And the third and last one is about making the bridge between the different international forums. So we need to build bridges between the G20 and BRICS, the UNFCCC and BRICS, and so on. Yesterday, during the opening ceremony, someone said, I don't understand why we keep celebrating documents where we reaffirm what has already been discussed, negotiated, and agreed. So this is precisely what we need to do. There are lots of things that were already negotiated in different forums, but we need to make sure that we take this forward. So looking, for example, to the G20, we had the last 4 years the G20 led by developing countries. And we have a huge legacy that won't go away, and we need to build up on this. Thank you.
Right, I actually want to come back to that later.
Okay.
The question of G20 and BRICS with the rotating presidencies that are coming out. But Dhruva, let me turn to you. You did say that you want to be provocative, so be as provocative as you want. We're starting the day. But I do have to ask you, given the political and economic as well as strategic differences that exist within the countries of expanded BRICS, with the Indian presidency coming up, can India build on common concerns of members? What do you think will be the dilemmas of the Indian presidency as well as the priorities?
Thank you, Sunena. And the short answer I would give is India does have a tradition and history of trying to build consensus, and you saw it during its G20 presidency a few years ago. But in many ways, BRICS is at an inflection point today, and in some ways a very worrisome inflection point for the organization. I should actually just start off by saying it's my first visit here to South Africa, and it's really been a sort of wonderful, eye-opening visit. In some ways, it's personally quite poignant for me, because until I was 9 years old, my Indian passport said on it that it was valid for travel to all countries except South Africa. And it tells you that 35 years ago, the world was a very, very different place. And I grew up with sort of associations with the Soweto uprising and Biko and other things, when we thought about South Africa. And it just tells you, so again, how much the world has changed over the past 3.5 decades. And so some of the confident predictions we have about the international order, about world politics, when we look ahead over the next 3 or 4 decades, may not come to pass, or at the very least, we're going to have to revisit our presumptions periodically. Which brings us to BRICS. I think we have to remember that BRICS arose under very specific circumstances. It had been around as an idea for some time, in the late 1990s and early 2000s, but it really came into its own after the 2008-2009 global financial crisis, with, in some ways, a pretty singular objective of advocating for greater representation for developing and emerging economies in the international economic order. And it was really, in some ways, a response to the continued intransigence, or that was how it felt, of the established developed economies. And that resulted in one concrete outcome, which was the new Development Bank, the NDB, which still arguably is BRICS' biggest accomplishment. There have other things as well. There's a CRA, a central bank liquidity swap. But even soon after the establishment of the new Development Bank, I think some of the limitations came to the fore of this organization. And the fact that China felt compelled to establish yet another bank, AIIB, in 2013, of which the two other largest voting members after China are India and Russia, in that order, tells you again some of the inadequacies of the NDB even at that time. Even to this date, 15 years later, the NDB is not really a substitute for the Bretton Woods institutions. By one estimate, it's about 1/20th of the lending of the World Bank, and that's a conservative estimate because that doesn't include IFC lending. So, membership certainly has expanded of BRICS. Some would see that as a sign of success. And there is obviously an appeal to joining BRICS. There's a reason why several countries have expressed interest beyond the ones who've already joined in the expanded BRICS format. The central biggest appeal is that most of the members, whatever their other differences, value the sovereignty. And that in some ways is the defining characteristics of many BRICS countries. However, what aspect of sovereignty they emphasize is very different from country to country. So in some cases it's more economic, in some more technological, some more political. And so the reality, of course, is that BRICS is flailing at this point, despite the expansion. And it is in danger, in some ways, of failing if it does not reach compromise and reach a consensus on certain key issues. And you see this in recent statements. We had a foreign ministers meeting last year where there was a failure to reach consensus on some pretty simple issues, and that doesn't bode well going ahead. We don't have a common BRICS position, for example, on UN Security Council reform. In fact, one of the BRICS members is one of the P5, perhaps most intransigent about UN Security Council reform. You don't have a common position on terrorism. We don't have a common position on lending standards. And even on areas where there has been some consensus, it's been quite weak. We had a declaration on AI issued recently. We've had some coordination on climate, but obviously not enough, as we saw at COP. And even on digital payments, another area where there's been interest expressed by many BRICS countries. So, I mean, when you look at all of this, you see that BRICS is, in many ways, a talk shop, a useful talk shop, maybe, but still a talk shop. And unfortunately, a new international order is not constructed through talk shops alone. Building an inclusive international order is hard. If it's optics that the BRICS members want, then great. I think that objective will be reached. It's been a useful negotiating tool for many countries, including some aspirant countries. But building a working institution will require flexibility and will require compromise. And at present, that does not seem like it is forthcoming.
Okay, a quick follow-up. You said that BRICS has failed. It is a statement that President Trump made earlier this year in February.
I haven't said it's failed. I said it's at risk of failing.
It's at the risk of failing. So is the G20.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So where do we go from here?
No, I think this is not a very good moment for multilateralism. And you see this, again, we've just come off COP. We had some intensive discussions yesterday here with several members, and Mariana was there, of people, including many people who had just been in Belém. But if you see between COP, G20 summit, where the US has boycotted, you see again a vacuum here, and yet an either unwillingness or incapability of many other actors to fill that vacuum. And that is, I think, where we're at right now. So it's not really a good moment for multilateralism.
Okay, I'm going to bring that question back to you, Mariana, of course, because, Brazil has had these presidencies. When we look at the preceding G20 presidencies, the Global South ones, so much of the focus has been on economic cooperation and the development agenda. Do you think that if the US cedes on that, which it seems quite likely that it will, with the expanded BRICS that is taking in more countries from the Global South, can it sort of step up to that role, or is that not possible?
Thank you. I think I woke up in a positive mood today. So regarding, just to pick up what you brought regarding the G20, I wanted to bring 3 topics. The first one is that we have a background record. We have legacy when we look to G20, and nothing will change this. So we had the last 4 years led by developing countries, the IPSA plus Indonesia, and we have a legacy that it's there, and no one will take this out. So we have, for example, the Indonesian, they launched the Bali Energy Transitions Roadmap. We had India launching the Global Biofuels Alliance. We had Brazil launching the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty. We now have South Africa that created the G20 Food Security Task Force, brought solidarity, equality, and sustainability into the center of the discussions, and it's there. The second thing is that next year we are going to have the G20 presided by the US. It will pass. We are not talking about short-term change. We are talking about medium and long-term. We got to be patient. It will pass. And meanwhile, we have a momentum next year to keep the discussions alive of critical issues for us. And one of these is the Indian presidency of BRICS. And the second one that I wanted to highlight is Brazil's presidency of COP30 next year. So there is lots to be done, lots in terms of continuity of Brazil brought this year within BRICS that we can and should continue it in some of the agendas, and also the same when we look to the UNFCCC and COP. We have, for example, 2 roadmaps that the Brazilian presidency will build next year, and it would be great to count with BRICS countries. One is about transitioning away from fossil fuels, and the other one is to end deforestation. So we have lots of work to do in 2026.
Luke, I want to bring up the question of New Development Bank, which both Mariana and Dhruva have talked about. When we look at that institution, do you think that it can be made more robust to deliver more tangible outcomes? And I am going to ask you the question of Africa again, but is that one reform that we can have to strengthen delivery of outcomes?
Thank you, Sunaina. That's a very, very important question. And so the issue that we have as a region is that we don't have a representation of the whole of Africa within BRICS. We have South Africa, yes, but I think we need to initially have representation. So that when we talk about this, it's not about only these countries that have joined, but a representative of the African region is the starting point. Then when you are then on the table, this is where now you bring the issue that you're talking about to say, do you think that the NDB would be the investment vehicle to actually unlock the potential of Africa? Yes, it is, but it cannot be talked about from outside. We need to be on the table. Then when we are on the table, then we align the funding towards our key focus areas as Africa, not only to benefit us as Africa, but to benefit the region. I'll give you an example. of late, I've been around a lot of conversations where people talk about critical minerals. And of late, I think it really gets to me when people are still talking about critical minerals. I'm of the view that we should be past talking about critical minerals and talk about the value additions after critical minerals. Because the moment we continue talking about critical minerals, we give the notion that we still must send them out there as raw ores. So those kind of semantics need to be talked about when we're on the table. And I have a strong feeling that once we're on the table, the reforms to meet our own endowments becomes easy because we are part of the discussion table. But as long as we are speaking from outside the room, it becomes like rhetoric, like what has been said before. So we need to find ways of putting Africa on the table, just that we can then unlock the funding, we can unlock beneficiation, we can. What I also noticed that we've got a power issue. So once the moment you talk about critical minerals, then beneficiation, the next thing is power. So you cannot add value to the roles without power. So these are the kind of semantics that should be played around if at all we are going to say, let's restructure the NDB to also reach out to the needs of the region as well. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
So Valerie, from Russia's perspective, and of course there has been this rising sentiment under the Trump presidency that BRICS is seen as a geopolitical rival bloc. How do you think BRICS can avoid that binary? And what do you think its identity should be? Should its identity be as a platform for the global south or the global majority, as Russia likes to say?
First of all, BRICS should be a representative of majority. It's not only global south. But as for status of BRICS, yes, I think that BRICS is perceived now as a counter bloc to the Western institutions. And it's impossible to escape some competition like in market economy. But problem is not competition itself, but artificial over-politicization of all issues around BRICS. You can see, for example, American very strong stance on imposing an additional 10% sanctions just for cooperation with BRICS. And President Trump even has attributed any forum's activity as hostile to American national interests. That indicates, by the way, that BRICS authority is growing. So the problem is that the West cannot accept a new reality, but in long term, geopolitical role of the BRICS and BRICS Plus will persist due to mistrust of the G7 countries worldwide. The West is expanding sanctions against Russia and China and leading this way to destabilization of the global trading system. And this trend is facilitated by the United States, which excluded Ethiopia from African Growth and Opportunity Act and threatening South Africa to do the same. But if we look in the future, we can see that even in economical dimension, BRICS performance was impressive just from the first steps. And if you see today on BRICS Plus, this group will collectively control over 72 of the world's rare earth elements, 75% of manganese, 15% of graphite, and 28% of nickel, and so on. And you can see that a large amount of resources and energy allows these countries to exert strategic influence within the regions and beyond. For example, China has successfully positioned itself as a major magnesium exporter and can manipulate prices in the world market. As a result, magnesium production outside China has decreased significantly. But finally, if we look at this problem of rivalry between BRICS and Western institutions, I think that we should look and we should find some political will of BRICS states just to go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone want to respond to that from the panel, or I'm going to open this up to the audience? So we will take audience questions. There are mics on both sides of the room. Could you please walk up to the mics?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Gilbert Nyandeji. I'm from Africa Cyber Defense Forum. First of all, I want to say good job the BRICS has done with regards to challenging the Western homogeny in terms of bringing the different world order. With now you're talking about the G7 at maybe 30% of the GDP and 32% approximately controlled by the BRICS. My only question to you and the panelists is, with the recent admission of quite a number of countries, right, that have now been admitted into the initial BRICS, with different diverging political interest, economic interest, do we see a situation where BRICS might end up, turning into a talk shop where, different countries' interests diverge, where they pursue national interest versus the common agenda? And without mentioning names of the countries, I'm sure you know them, I want to be politically correct, because I can give an example. For example, a good number of you are aware of, for example, the Nile issue, for example, where one country might have its own national interest, right? That might not basically, but a little bit conflict. So how do you basically balance that national interest and the common agenda you want to achieve? The other part now with the reality we have with the US, where some countries will be, rushing to Washington to cover their interests and end up maybe basically going against the common agenda. You talk about the recent bank, which is the new development bank. Really, it's not really significant in the global agenda in terms of financial instruments. So my question to you, how do we balance that interest between the BRICS countries' new interests and also the national agenda? Thank you so much.
Okay, we'll take a few together.
Okay, Luke, when you spoke, you talked about having an African representation in BRICS. And my question on that is, looking at the fact that Africa is diverse, we've got over 50-something countries with different interests, different stages of growth. If we decide to have an African representation, how will that address the needs of these countries? And also looking at the fact that when we look at the setup of BRICS, the priorities of the key players are different. Will they prioritize the development needs of African countries? And finally, you talked about, the last comment there is on looking at creating a solution for ourselves. So I'd like to get your thoughts on the role of African Union. So do you see African Union creating a solution and filling in the gaps that if African countries are unable to join BRICS, we will be able to still meet our development goals and achieve economic growth? Thank you.
Hi, I have a question to the representatives from India, South America, and Africa. Why do you think those
Sorry,
BRICS...
could you introduce...
Václav Lukovic, hi. Why do you think those countries don't use their political power to shape a just global order? I think South Africa has been very vocal on the topic of Palestine, of Gaza, and among the BRICS members, there is Russia, who is the aggressor starting a war. And really, the other BRICS countries are not speaking out against this. I think when we look forward and look about legitimacy, shaping a just global order, I'm really surprised not to hear a vocal response to this brutal aggression by Russia.
We'll take the last question.
Thank you so much, Ella Batan. I think since yesterday we talked about Africa having a meaningful seat at the table. How do we make sure that the seat at the table is meaningful? And how do you make sure that you carry citizen aspiration in those rooms where they often don't have access to? Thank you.
Okay, should we, let's start with you, Dhruvad.
So I'll just address three of them very quickly. One, I mean, as I said in my remarks, it's not a risk of becoming a talk shop, it is a talk shop. So the risk now is, how do, I mean, the challenge is how do we make it, how do you make it more than that? How can you make BRICS more substantive? I also am a bit wary of some of the somewhat self-congratulatory nature of the BRICS conversation amongst BRICS countries, because again, when you talk about growth of the BRICS, I mean, really that growth is concentrated in a few countries only. And the power disparity between one in particular, China, and the rest is quite stark. And so I do think sometimes it's easy to lump, you know, the BRICS collectively offer this kind of economic dynamism, but the fact is it's not even, and I think that needs to be acknowledged. On African representation, I can't speak for Africa, but I do want to emphasize that part of the reason why during the Indian presidency of the G20, there was an effort made to bring the AU into the G20. And it was more than just a symbolic moment, it was to get that African voice on a major forum of global governance. How we now use that, I think, remains to be seen. But I think that was an effort at getting a representative African voice on at least one stage. And finally, on the, it's not as if countries of the Global South have been silent on issues. They have taken positions on many issues. And I think the fact, again, that we're able to, unlike at the UN Security Council, get consensus language on the Ukraine war at the G20 presidency, the summit 2 years ago in New Delhi, I think is indicative of the ability of countries to reach a compromise. And I think the idea that bringing an end to conflict is something that these countries can work together in a constructive way to do is there. I mean, we can make empty statements, but actually working towards building that consensus is much harder. So again, I'm not sure it's entirely accurate to say that some countries of the Global South have been sitting this out.
Who wants to go next?
Thank you for the very, very interesting and very difficult questions. But let me try and also just think on the go. The question that was asked by Gilbert to say, how do we balance the interest of the countries? I think primarily the problem or the challenge, let me put it that way, that we've had as Africa is that many times as countries we don't know what we have, what we own. How am I saying? Last week we had a discussion on critical minerals, and the estimate is about 30% for now, with an open clause to say there might be more. So the moment we don't know what we have, it's difficult to bring it to the table for discussion. So what I would say is for us then to align with the global world, with where we want to go, we need to understand what we have, which then sinks into the issue of how we can join as a group, and yet we have got so many different interests. And this is the part that I said. The moment we know the strength of, for instance, Zimbabwe, the strength of South Africa, already we begin to see what they're going to bring to the table. If there is also another country with similar features as Zimbabwe, we say, let them find each other, then bring the discussion not as a unit, but as one whole group. And the issue of creative solutions is upon us. I'll be honest with you. The moment we have these kind of deliberations, and the moment that ends and we leave it there, it means that the whole process of creative solutions is dead. So what am I saying? We need to take this beyond the discussions. We need to involve all the stakeholders involved, such that when we then come to the table, we are not going back to say, the interest of this stakeholder has not been involved. So, like I said, we need to go together. But as we go together, we must find each other. What are you good at and what can you do? What are you bringing to the table? Without us finding each other as a region and bringing and speaking with one voice, it will be difficult for us to actually sell the global, the demographic dividend that we're actually proud of. Without us understanding how this dividend is structured across the African countries, what do South Africans know better than Zimbabweans, than Nigerians, we will never actually try and get to where we want to get as a region.
All right. Valerie, you have a comment.
Yes. Very briefly. I think that the most important question is how to put together countries with a very different agenda. And here I can offer, maybe it's interesting for India, to establish a council of state members that should be done. And this institution could regulate the work of some departments that also should be established. For example, departments on the development of economic cooperation. And another point is at the level of the United States, BRICS states should develop a unified approach to reform this organization so that to enhance the role of African, Asian, and Latin American countries. And Russia supports this many times.
All right. I can clearly see that this discussion could have gone on for longer, but the speakers are here and please continue engaging with them outside of this. I'm being told by Sukhmani that we need to wrap this up. Thank you to Dhruva, Mariana, Luke, and Valerie for this discussion.
Thank you.